Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Box, again with Dr. Ronald G. Taylor, sponsored by Novo Dia. And also want to just really say thank you for all the support and feedback that you've given us around these conversations. We try to keep them as authentic as possible. I'm a retired superintendent with about 30 years of public education experience that includes being a teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and also superintendent. And for those who are interested in reading some great stories about careers that are interesting and about the fight for instructional and educational integrity and equity, you can also feel free to look for my book. It's The Courage to Lead with Integrity for Equity, an authentic educational equity journey that's available everywhere. There's also, of course, a link on my LinkedIn. Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Box with Dr. Ron Taylor. I'm so excited for our guest today. His name is Zeek Edmond. He serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning at Tacoma Public Schools, where he holds responsibility for overseeing instructional improvement, professional development initiatives, and early learning programs across the district. In this role, he provides leadership on curriculum and instruction, manages grant funding for the educational initiatives, and coordinates comprehensive support systems for teachers and students. Edmund has been instrumental in expanding access to quality early learning opportunities and developing systems that support educator effectiveness and retention. Prior to his current position, Edmund served as a principal in the Tacoma Public Schools system, where he demonstrated exceptional instructional leadership and was recognized for cultivating school communities conducive to learning and professional growth. His work as a building level leader informed his understanding of the challenges educators and students face and positioned him to develop district wide solutions. If he looks familiar, Edmund was featured prominently in the documentary 178 Days Confronting a History of Failure, which examines school improvement efforts and the real world complexities of educational leadership. His trajectory from principal to central office leadership reflects a commitment to systemic improvement and educator support. Welcome, Zeke.
Thank you for having me.
And in Beyond the Box, we try to think about and talk about and share with our audience ways that educational leaders have to be innovative when it comes to making sure our kids get everything they need to be successful. In Zink's work with Tacoma Public Schools, it connects directly to that theme of innovation and systemic change and reimagining educational systems. His leadership in expanding the transition to kindergarten program and implementing the beginning educator support team, known as BEST mentor program, demonstrates a commitment to breaking traditional boundaries in education and providing equitable access to high quality learning experiences. So, how are things going with you?
You make it sound so easy in the description, but it's great. We're at that magical mid-year part where you start to have a little anxiety. Are you on track to meet your goals? And a little bit of reflection on what you've been able to do kind of through the first half. And so these become key times because, as you know, we'll also start putting one foot into thinking about next year and right numbers come in, performance, staffing, all those kind of things. So uh, it's my favorite, but it does get a little wild.
Oh yeah, mid year, right? Is
Yeah. Yeah.
all the numbers come to fruition, and you're already thinking about preparing for the summer and next year. We know all about it. So when we're going through your introduction, we talked a little bit about some of your key accomplishments. And so when you think about some of the things that I shared, what were the key barriers to expanding preschool programs across 34 schools in Tacoma, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think part of it was, I think you got to bring in that ambition part first, right? Can we do this? What does it look like? Why not? We had done some pilot work. We started with 5 or 6 schools. The state had adjusted kind of their language with transition to kindergarten programming. We already had Head Start and ECAP. We were running some specialized preschool programs. We even had a title lap version of preschool, a multilingual version of preschool. But we started having, once we got up to like 7 different kinds of programs, it was almost more challenging because your decision trees start to really isolate. I can only have a kid that meets this criteria in this program. And I only have one of those sites over here on this side of town. Tacoma is a little over 50 square miles. And so we have a pretty good sprawl. And so if we're not at least regional, then I'm not really giving access, right, to all kids. And so we started looking across departments. Why have special ed running theirs in isolation from gen ed, from ECAP, from title? How do we get all these directors in the room? How do we look at the state funding different? What do we push senior leadership to open their eyes to? How do we go into buildings and look for space? Preschoolers have a little different need: bathroom access, square footage of room, right? You can't have too many doors on there, right? Because they are escape, right? Creative. And then what are we offering during that day? And why, when I first came in, we had a lot of half-day programming. That was a struggle for parents. What do I do to get my kid at noon or drop my kid off in the middle of the day? So our full-day programs were having success. It's a long day for a 3, 4-year-old, but we find by October they've built some stamina. And so all those moving parts became this kind of cohesive. Then yes, let's do every building. Let's do all day. Let's bring our sped kids into a gen ed space so that we're inclusive. Let's rethink about our decision tree to prioritize students based on having an IEP or having an income, right, percentage. We look at that, family status, and we work our way down to in catchment. So now I'm not having to bus as many. Now I'm not, I can give that 3-year-old an opportunity to stay there 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, and be part of the community. The odds that they had siblings in the same building, right? So the family has one drop off. It's in the morning. I show up at the end of the day. My kid's been able to have all these experiences. Transition to kindergarten gives that 4-year-old same opportunity as a 5-year-old to go to PE and music and library and lunch and recess and do all those things that make you feel like part of that school community. And so we had certainly a lot of growing pains going from 5 schools to 11 schools to then finally just cutting the cord and going across. We had to change how we did PD for those folks. Supports, we're still playing with that. That's part of, as we talked in our intro, as we're at the mid-year, like, how is that going? What do we need to adjust? We do need to make some adjustments for next fall, but we're tracking on that. But wow, we've got almost 1,800 preschoolers. I run about 2,000 kids per grade level. So to have almost as many preschoolers as we have in each grade level, then we're on the right track of equal access, right?
Oh, that's the beautiful story and conclusion there, even though it never stops, right? It's always
Oh,
moving,
yeah.
always. And early childhood was the beginning of my career as a kindergarten teacher, and even rising all the way up to superintendent, always trying to make sure that all of our kids had access, and that understanding that their time with us was just so important. Going from
Right.
a half day to a full day is just such a huge accomplishment. Growing it from 5 schools to 11 schools to the entire school district. Just kudos to you and everyone who was involved. And so it's shifting a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the best program.
So we're lucky we through the best grant, right? We're looking not only just at first year teachers, but second year teachers. And we've been able to open the door for folks that had a significant shift. So, maybe you went from 4th to 5th grade. I don't know that I would consider that significant, but if you feel you need the support, we're happy to lean in. But maybe you went from elementary to middle school, or you went from secondary down to elementary, or you made a big grade or a subject change, then we want to include you in part of that because, as you know, you do kind of start over. I might have 7, 8, 9 years of experience, but if I was doing 7th grade science and I'm now in a 4th grade classroom, it's very different to have these kids all day doing all subjects, right? And so classrooms and routines and structures that got me through 55 minutes won't get me through 6.5 hours. And so we've expanded best now to include the newbies up through the folks that have had significant change. Michelle Tyson does a fantastic job kind of coordinating that. We have her in our department. And so obviously I can't have just one person mentoring all these. So we create kind of a network of mentors. And so she's really pushed out a lot of content in how to help mentors look at how they're helping other teachers. So it's not just you raised your hand, and so we're now going to send you out and kind of cross fingers, but intentionally, here's how you coach up a new teacher. Here's strategies and tools and resources. And then we've built that same repository for the new teacher as well. And the kind of the fun part of there for the new teachers, you do have to do everything. Like, here's how you access your payroll, right? Like, let's just talk about some of the low Maslow signing in, logging in, accessing acronyms, right? We so love acronyms in education. And so I think, if we flash back to like, there were meetings I sat in as a newbie that I probably didn't actually know was being discussed because it was all in 3-letter, right, verbiage. So how do we break some of that down, glossaries and things like that? So she does a great job of personally checking in, building relationships. We do a couple days in the summer to launch and give these folks a chance to come together. It's fun to see new teachers in a room together, right? Fresh contract, excited, job, family's proud and excited for them, friends are behind them, but the bell hasn't rang. And so that becomes a very different reality September or October. So she's out in the schools, in their presence, answering questions, responding online, connecting with principals. We used to have instructional coaches in every building, so there used to be an additional layer. We lost that as, right, we've seen districts lose funding. And so now Michelle's kind of in double time using our other curriculum instructional facilitators to also help in their specific areas as well. And so retooling our network so that we still have light capacity regardless of these cuts, bringing other mentors on board. Michelle's our ringleader with that. And so that connection throughout the year and even into your second year, I think significantly helps newbies at least know they have an ally. Schools do a great job rallying around their new folks. Everybody in a school was there at some point. So whether it's just from a sympathy level or they have some constructive feedback to give them, we'll take all of it. But we also try to provide that district level. So giving them a chance, a safe place to talk to somebody when they're stuck. It could be as simple as changing a routine in class, or I am part of a PLC with a teammate that has a very different style than me, and I'm not sure how to navigate that, right? And depending on their life experience, this could be very new to work with someone else that tight. So we want to be able to support that dynamic just as much as the kid part too. It's part of our success in schools is navigating both the students and the adults.
Nothing like a new teacher, right? You make it sound like it's hard being a new teacher. Come on, Zeke. I mean, yeah, and I think that the reality of 2026 now that we all are experiencing around the country is there's not as many teachers who are looking to come into our schools as they were, right? But when you have vacancies, they're not as easy to fill. And so always trying to make sure that we're nurturing those new folks and helping them understand that year two will be easier than year one, right? Even though you're excited to be there, you can't anticipate all the time all the things that come with being a first year teacher. And I love the fact that you mentioned when you're shifting between grades, right? When you have folks who might have dual certificates, or their school might call for a fifth grade teacher instead of a second grade teacher. It sounds like it's the same job to those folks who are not in education, but it can be a big shift. And having that mentor relationship where you're not being judged or evaluated, you're being supported. I think that's just super powerful. So big kudos for that. And now to the part that makes you a celebrity here with us. Tell us about the work that is featured in 178 days. Um, what were the most challenging moments in that school improvement journey?
So I've been really blessed in a twisted way. I was able to teach in a school that unfortunately had fallen under state and federal sanctions, became a reading first school, right? So low performance got us additional funding to get out of that status. My first year as an assistant principal is in a similar school. I think we were 97% free and reduced lunch in that building. We saw scores in the low teens. We got them up to the 50s, 70%. I had a chance as a principal in an elementary that was not a grant school, but no child left behind. And that whole dynamic really taught you to finite assess where your kids were, not just in something like reading, but in all the components that, right, the 5 that break down reading and build up. And so you had to change how you did PD, how you structured your materials, how you intervened. So then I actually, by the time I got to the school where we did the documentary, it was on my 4th kind of turnaround SIG rad school. It's by federal sanction. But we were in the bottom 1%. So we actually found some residential treatment facilities that had higher test scores than our comprehensive middle school. And so it was very different to sit down with staff and say, okay, let's rethink not only how we engage kids in this growth process, but where are we as adults? So the very first thing was, what are all the typical barriers that we know, right? And so we know kids in urban settings, low socioeconomic status, right? Diverse population. Maybe you've got a large, like we had quite a few rookie teachers. The school had been through so many iterations of change, from No Child Left Behind to SIG to RAD, that it actually had started back in '06. I showed up in 2014. So you can imagine in that 8-year window, all the different things. And quite a few dollars, right? I think I was principal 5 or 6 in that window as well. The difference, I think, in that, and that's tracked in the documentary, is we chose to be transparent out of the gate. So even in the first day with staff, we had 3-4 days of training ahead of time. We started obviously with the data and very clear which kids were or weren't, which staff were and weren't showing success or growth. Our first assembly was not rules. It was actually showing the students the data. And we might have had some fun with it, right? Like they had taken a small bump the year prior to me getting there. And so I said, hey, anybody have any older siblings that might be off in high school that were here? You actually are smarter than next to you. You might want to help them in high school at their home. Right? It's okay to engage in data and not punish, but to show an opportunity for some wins and where they can go next. And so we started feeding this interest, this desire to track their own progress. We know Hattie's research about high yield strategies, right? So when were students self-assessing in class? When could they see their own growth? And so I didn't care if it was around a tiny little standard, today's lesson, a science lab, your mile time, your video project for broadcast. Like it didn't matter as long as they could see, a couple days ago I was here, today I'm here. Then I know I can do that week over, month over, right? And now fall to winter, we saw significant gains in reading and math that are just first. Now, it's always interesting to say significant when you're in the 8, 10, 12% and you're at 20, 23, but the kids get the win of that. The staff get the win of that. And so it builds that momentum. So we incentivize not from like we're going to give out big awards and points and all these, but rather where could we be from a Stewart Panther Pride level when we look at the other 10 middle schools? And so I started showing them all their data across the district. And they went from last to second to last to third, right? And so now they can see, we make these jokes about being on the podium, right? The Olympics. And so I built a podium and it just sat there in the middle of the school for them to like, and what is this? But it becomes this symbolic thing. And sure enough, by year end, we were in 3rd out of 10. And so we celebrated that, right? Like rally assembly level celebrated that. So there's kids screaming and cheering at the end. Okay, so we're 30, 40%. We're not there. But the academic confidence that the kid has, the joy of having some wins as the adults, what I saw before I got there is the staff weren't having wins either. And so they couldn't see that where PB was 2 days ago to today. They couldn't see that week over. They couldn't see that lab growth. They couldn't see the mile time, right? Like all these elements So we did a different schedule. We did 5 periods. We went 67 minutes for math and ELA and science, right? So the informational text periods socially are longer. We know that's the big struggle in schools with low performance, right? How do you build that academic vocabulary? We did unit planning as a staff and analyzed our units and wrote reflections. And yes, staff, I think, wanted to, put my car up on blocks when I first said we're going to lean into this unit planning. But as they got into it, one of the things I noticed is I'd left this little box on this 2-page document for their reflection on how they thought the unit went. And about half the staff would actually open up a separate Word document and just start typing what they learned about themselves and students in that unit. And so when you think about some of these units are only 2 to 4 weeks, and now they're in this cycle of growth themselves, that became the power tool. So we're having common planning, we're meeting together, we have instructional coaches, they're looking at their practice, they're thinking about their next move. In the end, I think I tallied up, it was just under about 100 hours of job embedded PD for the staff. And then for the students, we started to shift towards, they were self-selecting. So we actually called it Friday FaceTime. Kids were self-selecting by Wednesday where on Friday afternoon they would spend their time with which teacher they needed the most help with. And they'd have these sign-up sheets and they'd go to their places. So we didn't have to do full separate interventions. I actually had no intervention teachers. The kids just knew I needed more time with my science teacher. And so on Friday, right now, if I would have said Friday fun time was you picking more, that wouldn't have worked in September. We got there, but that wouldn't have worked in day one. So building your culture where when I say kids owned it, kids physically own it. Now, if you tried to be the kid that didn't sign up, teachers had by Wednesday afternoon permission to then sign up the kids they didn't see. So we captured everybody, right? I'll say equal opportunity. But then it was really fun to walk around on Friday. And some kids they were in their elective. They needed to double down on their art project just as much as their math the next Friday. So we really did see staff embrace growing, not just them, but kids. And I think if you can get a campus where growth is for everybody on campus, myself included, then you see different outcomes than when it's just, why aren't the kids?
I love that. I mean, for anyone who's watching who knows my story or read my book, I had really similar type of engagement and success with a fantastic team that I was able to build as a principal. And I just love that I didn't have to prompt you to share some of those details, right? When folks hear about data-driven instruction or kids learning about their data, it's not beating them over the heads negatively about where they are. It's sometimes kids don't even know what the data is, right? With the adults who are engaged or the parents or the community or maybe even central office, of course, know about the data and the rankings and those type of things. But are we telling the kids where we are? Are we telling the kids where they are specifically and personally in a way that motivates them, right? Not a way that demeans them. And are you continuing to hold that North Star up as a goal, not as a negative experience for them? I love that. And I experienced that personally as well. And I also love giving kids voice and choice, right? That is so huge, right? You know, when you're 7, 8, maybe even 15 years old, you don't really have a lot of choice in your life. And so having that is so empowering, being able to select what you need and where you're connected to, it can just be a huge. So thank you again for sharing that story. And we talk about our students, we talk about them, socially, emotionally, and of course academically. In some places that's called, whole child development. And so, in your strategic plan in Tacoma, it seems to be an emphasis around whole child development. What does this mean operationally, and how does it change daily instruction for your students?
For sure. So I think there's kind of a couple phases. We can go back several years, and Dr. Garcia, our superintendent, as he really tried to bring some of that focus on, like, not only where are we providing the explicit instruction around SEL, but creating restorative practices, decreasing exclusion, How are we setting staff up for success in that space? We started with, as any kind of, I'll say, medium, larger district might, cohorts of schools, intentional PD, but it was really a learning curve that the district language still hadn't adopted. So you started seeing schools have success, principals, staff taking it and running, morning meetings. We had the curriculum, rethinking how we kind of say re-engage students to come back in the classroom when they may have had a breakdown or a disruption or something of that nature versus an exclusion practice. And so that over kind of a few years, I'll say late teens coming through COVID, really had some traction. K-8 was showing up a little bit different in high school. In middle schools, you saw advisories instead of morning meetings. So you'd have anywhere from a 20 to 30-minute advisory. Most were daily. Some might have been 2-3 days a week, delivering the curriculum, SEL curriculum, having conversations with kids, goal setting, grade checking. A few schools even took on like student-led conferences, things of that nature. So when you talk earlier about voice and choice, empowering, engaging them in their own right analysis of their performance and reflection, we saw that not just on the academic, but now they're doing it around choices they've made and how they build relationships and self-management, right? And some of those social awareness pieces. So we have our pillars. We use our zones of regulation. We consistently then started to see schools, just that climate culture in the building feel difference, school pride, things of that nature. What I'd start to say then is over the last couple, 3 years, when we really started unpacking MTSS, and that's something we've done some RTI work, but this is the first time I think we across departments meet regularly and build this out. And so now we start talking about behaviors from majors and minors, tier 1, tier 2 supports for behaviors. And so we're in this place now of really unpacking very explicitly strategies and tools for teachers, not just at that classroom level for redirection and proactive, but if something happens, is it really a major? Does everything need to be escalated, or is this a minor? And if it's minor, then what are the tools we give teachers to deal with the minors and get them back in so they're not losing academic time? And then if it is something more significant or major, what are those? How do we help staff build behavior plans, right? If it's something where a kid needs to be on some kind of structured routine that's different than the normal, how do we accommodate that during the school day? And so we have some tools now to track that. We're having some training that goes with that. So we couldn't be where we are today and what we're building next if we hadn't seen such significant, not only implementation, but growth from a whole child lens all across all of our pillars, right? And that proactive piece, teaching it, not just saying we do SEL because we check in with kids and we do a check-in, check-out, or we, have a circle once a week where we talk about something. It's class feelings and moods, but it's daily and it's part of the structure and routine. And because it's part of how we do breakfast in class, now if I look at an elementary space, I come in, whether I'm K or 5, I could have a 5 or a 10-year-old, and I'm in my learning community, breaking bread, having a conversation. It's intentional, so it's not just the random topic pulled out of the book of questions kind of a thing. That scaffolds us to go deeper and further throughout the course of the year. Now when something comes up, because it will come up, right? It's something you can almost set a calendar to. The school, that classroom, that teacher, that group of kids have more strategies to cope, to deal, to have a positive outcome from it. I'm not saying kids won't still be kids, 100%. We expect that. But this proactive drive for whole child and SEL is very different than just waiting for something to happen. And now all of a sudden having a better bag of tricks to deal with it. The front load has been the focus. And so now we're trying to, so for like, when I say, where are we now? Normally curriculum instruction department would do today's your math training with principals and teachers, and the whole child department would do your SEL training. So as we're looking at that universally, C&I led school-wide expectations, right? Reflection, we just talked about this mid-year. So in December, How do we get ready for your mid-year, kind of recalibrate with students and staff? Because we all come out of holiday, like a little like, what happens? All that's been front loaded. So principals, teachers had time to reflect on that, get some PD, come back and reestablish expectations, be proactive, and now drive through June, right? So I can't get to more math if there's more disruptions, right? So if CNI, if your instruction departments aren't embracing what behaviors manifest in classrooms as part of your curriculum, you're missing a massive opportunity to get more learning across for kids. So what happens? Schools that typically have more disruptions, pacing guide issues, they don't get to that last unit. So you can physically track in your districts that if geometry is always the last unit of math, and your schools that are low performing never get to the geometry unit, you will have K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids that never saw geometry. And when they get to a middle school, or it might even happen in 6, 7, and 8, and they get to high school, like you have kids that don't get significant content if we can't stay on pace. And part of staying on pace is, how are we allowing a space for learning with decreased disruptions, right? And so it's a all lift and Tacoma versus we just wait for the whole child department to tell us how we can get better, right? No pressure in that. Just
I love that because it's not often stated, right? How disruption or students who are missing time, if there's just a school day and a school year that's not intentionally organized to really preemptively address what could be expected student behavior challenges, how that impacts the pacing of the instruction and the pacing guides and curriculum design and so if the curriculum C&I department, when they're developing the curriculums and putting them into place, if they are expecting every year, well, we normally go and we hit a particular area at the end of the year, year over year over year, and there's a school that's not functioning at the highest level and the teachers are not getting to that. What does that mean for that group of kids almost generationally, right? You can probably track that and see where those kids are falling short on high stakes exams because they're not touching that instructional area. I love that summation. It makes a lot of sense. I think for even for folks who may not be educational leaders, just hearing that and understanding that we try to prevent that from happening, but we understand how it can happen.
oh,
Brilliant.
for
Thank you for sharing
sure.
that. Thank you. And so, it wouldn't be a beyond the box without me speaking about equity and wanting to hear more about educational equity in Tacoma. And so, just kind of open ended. Have you all identified disparities in student outcomes in Tacoma, and do you have targeted interventions for students who have those who are lacking behind the general group in student achievement?
Yeah, so this is another one where I think having been in the district as a teacher, as a principal, as a director, certainly I had some more insight coming into this role and overseeing preschool through 12. One of the things that we started doing from an RTI level is Title I was doing interventions, especially in reading, really well at elementary, some math and reading at middle school, special ed, obviously, your LRC rooms, your self-contained rooms, our multilingual department, right? So you had all these folks diligently working to get better in their areas. And then in the school space or in the curriculum instruction, that tier 1 core instruction piece was being supported. What was missing was some of the other structures and systems that would increase it at a building level, as well as a district. How are those departments coming together where you actually have common ground so you can decrease replicative work or decrease miscommunication or things that became more complex on a campus that needed. So in my first year, the first thing we actually started doing was school-wide schedules, course offerings, right? And so at middle school, it was let's put together what we expect, because we could either do the true middle school model, which is exploratory, Or what we really run is junior high. You're going to get 6 classes. You can take these required subject, right? Like, and I'm okay with either one. What I can't have is you thinking you're actually doing both, because you're not. Now you're in a hodgepodge that may not work. And so that first barrier is I had kids not accessing all the classes. We do algebra for all 8th graders. I had schools where the kids not all 8th graders were in algebra, and the principals and teachers had a variety of what I'll say are reasons. And then you could pull the data and see who was not getting algebra, right? So if all of my kids, special ed, black and brown, right, low socioeconomic, are not in algebra, then you've created a barrier out of the gate and you consciously made that decision. So that's a whole nother unpacking. So now the cold calls come, course audits, the accountability side of me getting on the phone, principal, right, walk me through. I got 9 8th graders that are not in there. I see 3 have an IEP. I see 3 definitely struggle in 7th grade. So I'm not denying that, but you have no plan to bring them into the course base, right? So let's work through that. What courses are we offering, right? We have social studies all year, 6, 7, and 8. We used to have a Washington State history requirement in high school. It comes down to middle school. We find it's a perfect fit in 7th grade. What does that look like? What has to come off the plate? School's trying to do too many things, right? So we just locked middle school folks in the room, but I also made the other departments come. Where's student services? Where's Title I? Where's ML? Where are my school directors? And so we got out plain paper and just started, what is the priority? Elementary, same thing. How do I fit in, right, a half dozen subjects, PE, music in the library, planning time, an intervention block? What are we even calling intervention? Well, it's MTSS. No, it's RTI. No, it's what we call it, right? Like, okay, so we need common language, common schedules. So we had barriers that historically developed because people had reasons why, well, at our school, we do it this way. Great. So what I'm seeing on the data side is a group of kids that look like me that aren't getting access. And I don't think you woke up in the morning to do that, but that's where we're at. And so we're going to learn how to schedule so that all kids can. We're going to learn how to build our intervention blocks in. And then guess what? Next year, we're going to do it again. And next year, we're going to, because we're refining, right? It's not actually easy to do all those things. So we spent 3 years every spring reevaluating what we wanted to see in the fall, just from a structure systems perspective. How did we staff? How do I get all these directors in the department? In my CNI side of the house, what materials we're looking at? We needed a reading adoption. We weren't doing science or reading before I got here. So we had to, people love to use the pendulum analogy, whatever it is. Folks freaked out. There's a war. There's no war on reading. Reading's low. We're coming out of pandemic. The research is clear. This is how we're going to do it. So we adopt new materials. We start the training. And then we start grade level band training for progress monitoring, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, right? People then ask the question, well, why aren't we doing kindergarten? Well, because we're actually going to bring play into kindergarten for the first 3 months because they're 5 and it's okay. I don't need to do reading intervention developmentally, right? I need to expose, give opportunity, and then we can come in the spring of kinder and start. But I don't need to start there in September, October. So kindergarten's doing this, 1st grade's doing this, 2nd grade, right? Middle school, high school, we started having these conversations about college and high school courses, AP courses. What about our kids that might need remedial support? What does it look like from an enrollment performance perspective? So we started unpacking that data and doing that work. So at every level, and in my preferred style, you bring the group of folks in the room, right? And many a hand, we start making better work of this. Now, it creates other issues. You take people out of their comfort box, right? You break tradition, if that's what they want to call it. The historical barriers sometimes weren't even, the current principal I'm talking to just got there last year, right? So they're still unpacking it themselves. We've had a fair amount of leadership turnover, and it's something we saw across the country when we look at coming out of pandemic. So I'm stoked you're the new principal who signed up for this gig, and here we go. Let's start looking at which teachers you even have in front of the kids teaching these courses. So I think we're still deep in that as we improve MTSS. The group of directors that have come across departments started about 3 years ago. And there's still, even though we meet every other Wednesday morning, just yesterday morning, still having ahas as a group around, hey, right? When I think about the progress monitoring that's required for primary grade, and before I can refer a kid to special ed, because all of that's changing, and the data that shows in the progress monitoring, we got to start getting really clear on the threshold scores. What does count for growth or not growth? How many weeks do we do this? So it's all these language and pieces, and they were systems related, right? Before I even could hold schools accountable, I needed to address at a district level. We don't speak the same language. We don't require the same standard to be met. We don't have, and it's not, I think we love the word accountability. We hadn't explicitly taught what we were expecting as an outcome. And so that's the first step. Let's get in the room. Let's learn together how we can do this better. Teach it, right? The principal PD times where it looked very different 6 years ago than they do today. It wasn't as routinized. It wasn't built in. There wasn't as tight of a feedback cycle. So I think the principals now see we've been able to tell you at the end of the training every single time how we feel, and we do see a difference at the next training. So we'll meet you where you're at, but I still have this end goal in mind as we're doing it, right? And so however that works, we'll stay in the room. We'll keep working through this. I'm not in any pretend that there's an answer. I just can't have the barriers stay where they're at. And then my favorite small win out of all that was field trips. As a senior leadership group, my first year, I pushed field trips because, again, coming through the system, I saw some schools got to go on significantly more field trips than other schools. And then we can't figure out why the kids have no schema or context for the things we're teaching in class. So we have K-8 field trips for every kid tied to what we learn in Tacoma. We have zoos and museums and glass museums, history museums. We have amazing park spaces, waterfront. We're a partial industrial, right? We've got shipping, military. So we have all these opportunities to expose kids, to help them see there's this bigger world than maybe the school catchment area they live in. And we've had significant funding impacts. And we still have field trips for every kid. And we now have high schoolers that are even getting opportunities to go out of state or even out of country. We've taken a couple hundred kids out of country even. We did our first trip to HBCUs last year with kids. And so we're not just stopping at the K-8 level. And so when we talk about equity or breaking down barriers or opportunity, it can't just be in math class.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I feel like I've been sitting next to you through this journey, right? Back to the very beginning of your master scheduling conundrum. I think for those who may not be as experienced in ed leadership, master scheduling is like the central nervous system of the schools, right? It controls everything. And it also can tell you the story of what's happening in schools, whether it be so beautifully told, kids are not getting their minimum seat time, and it's an adult decision, right? Whether it's um, algebra 1 or it's English 2 or wherever you are in the country, kids are not getting that seat time, and it's a decision that's being made by an adult on the other side of that master schedule, and it is just so important. I recall when I became an assistant principal and learning and seeing in the news that not every school did a great job with their master schedule, and kids show up the first day of school and they're all sitting in the auditorium because the master schedule is not quite done yet, right? Or teachers are now not quite in the classroom that they thought they were going to be. They've been preparing all summer for a particular course that they're not teaching anymore because of an outcome that wasn't a part of their daily. So kudos and thank you so much for taking time to share with us today. And it truly your journey is remarkable, and it truly matches the stories that we want to share with those folks who are coming into school leadership and looking for guidance and trying to learn lessons the easy way, not always the hard way. And we really appreciate the time that you took for us. And thank you so much for going beyond the box for the kids that you serve and the families that are part of your community.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Have a great day. Thank you, Zeke, for joining us. And next time when we're beyond the box, we'll have another outstanding leader coming to share the stories that match the true world of educational leadership that is not just coloring within the lines. Thank you so much.